This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Well, Prime Minister May is talking to Emmanuel Macron and to Donald Trump, and they're assessing the situation. And, of course, they've said that if there's any more use of chemical weapons, we will send in more missiles. And I'm asking whether you would support further airstrikes if this situation escalates. You can call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And, of course, you can follow us live and comment on Facebook too. Well, I don't know about more attacks. I'm really pretty questioning about the one we've done already. But you've heard enough from me, so let's get a military view. And let's go to Lord Alan West, former First Sea Lord, and man who ran the Royal Navy from 2002 to 2006. Good morning, Lord West.
Good morning.
So, was it right? Was it right to launch these attacks when we did?
I think assuming that the intelligence was unequivocal that Assad had actually used chemical weapons, I think it made sense to join the coalition to do a slap across his wrists to say, look, we're not any longer in the global, as a part of the global village, to put up with someone breaking this law that we all signed up to about use of chemical weapons. So I think the answer is yes, but I'm glad that it was a slap across the wrist and it hasn't become part of a much larger campaign, because there are some people who quite clearly would like us to do regime change, and we should not get involved in the civil war there.
No, and of course we have taken part in regime change in Iraq and indeed in Libya with some quite severe consequences. But you say if we're unequivocally clear. I mean, I just want to quote to you, Lord West, Boris Johnson, who's writing today in the Sunday Telegraph, and he says, a significant body of information, including intelligence, suggests that the Assad regime was behind the chemical attack at Douma that killed 75 people. Suggests. That's not particularly strong, is it?
Well, that's partly my worry, and I think historically there's no doubt that I think there's very little doubt that Assad has used chemical in the past.
Yes.
But on this occasion, I mean, speaking as a military man, I cannot see any military logic in him and his forces using chemical attack in an area that they were just about to take over anyway, because they'd effectively won the battle in that part of Syria. And so what on earth was the logic militarily in doing it, knowing that it would probably bring some form of retribution? Whereas if I'd been one of the very unpleasant groups that are opposing Assad, it would be hugely in my interest to try and pretend there'd been a chemical attack because of the fact that it might destabilize the regime. And that is what really worries me, and why I hope that, and I accept if the Prime Minister says she has got that proof, then I jolly well hope she has got it, because on that basis, yes, the attack. But if it's not that sure, I think we need to be extremely careful.
And, of course, knowing that ISIS and some of those rebel groups not only have chemical weapons but have used them themselves during this civil war, the incentive now for them to have another usage of chemical weapons and say it comes from Assad, knowing that America's locked and loaded. I mean, we could be in something of a trap here, couldn't we?
Well, I think it's certainly a risk which we have to be very, very, I think we would have to be very, very aware of. And although I believe that if there is proof, it's right that we did that slap on the wrist, which is larger than the last one we gave, and hopefully he will get the message if he did do that. It's not going to make this civil war any shorter, and I'm afraid what the poor benighted people of Syria need is an end to the civil war. It now looks as though that can come because Assad will win. He's not there yet, but it looks as though he's winning, and he is a loathsome man. But the people who oppose him are maniacs and loathsome as well. And, you know, there are no good guys in this. Everyone's bloody horrible. And civil wars are merciless, bloody and nasty. And we need to stop the fighting.
Yes.
And then we need to work on diplomacy things. And I think our policy as a government since 2012 has been poor. It was no good ignoring Assad and pretending he didn't exist. We should have actually still kept links to him, even though we don't like him. Because he is a fact of, he's a fact of life on the ground. And if he were suddenly deposed and his regime went, there would be 6 million Christians and Alawites who would either be killed or displaced. I mean, there are no good people in this war.
No, I agree with that. And it was why I found it incredible that William Hague and David Cameron were trying so hard in 2013 to get us to arm the rebels. But Parliament, of course, did reject that. Lord West, I want to say thank you very much indeed for joining us on this Sunday morning. Now, you know, if I'd said what Lord Wester Spithead had just said, you would say I was a ranting conspiracy theorist. But I was kind of teasing in the first hour a bit about this. You know, we know that the forces opposed to Assad have chemical weapons and have used chemical weapons. They are losing. Russia backing Assad, they are winning that civil war and winning it big time. You know, ISIS and other rebel groups are being defeated. They've now been pushed back into relatively small enclaves within Syria. It is massively in their interests to make the outside world think that Assad has used chemical weapons. And as I say, if I said that, you'd think I'd been smoking something funny and gone nuts. But we get it there, you know, from the former First Sea Lord saying he needs a bit more certainty to know that we've done the right thing here. If we have that certainty, he thinks the short, sharp shock is the right thing to do. And all right, maybe even I could go along with that if it wasn't for the fact that within 24 hours, we're locked and loaded, we're ready to go again, and we've given, in my view, a hostage to fortune. Hey, that's what I think. But tell me, are you prepared to back further airstrikes if this situation escalates? And I'm going to ask Steve in Brentwood and Essex that very question. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Hello, Nigel. Lovely to speak to you.
Good to speak to you, ma'am.
Look, the thing is, look, the situation is nothing to do with the Syrian people. It's to do with Western ideas of Middle East control of the oil situation. They don't like Assad. They want to remove him. They don't want the Russians to have control of the Syrian oil and gas supplies. And it's to do tied up with Dutch oil. I'm afraid that like us with Europe, we are being used as pawns on the dashboard. And that's what it's about. It's to do with oil control, and they don't like Assad in there. And I believe this gas attack, I think it was conjured up. There was no possibility of Assad doing it. There was no reason for him to do it because he already was winning the war.
Yeah.
And as for Theresa May, I feel that she's acted illegally. She's attacked a national country without no UN agreement. She's done exactly the same as Blair's done. She's gone down the same path as Blair, probably egged on by him and Alistair Campbell. And the fact she's got no sanctions from Parliament, she hasn't even waited for the report from the Weapons Inspectorate. She's jumped the gun. But I think behind that, as I say, is the control of the oil. And they want the whole situation to be under Western
You
control.
feel pretty strongly, Steve, about this, don't you? My goodness me.
Well, I've worked in the Middle East, and quite frankly, I can see the pictures quite clear to me what's going on. I'm afraid what you've done, Nigel, you've done absolutely fantastic over the 25 years. In fact, you gave inspiration to the people of this country, and we owe you a debt that we'll never repay.
Well, I tell you what, the next time I'm in Brentwood, Steve, you can buy me a drink. How about that?
Thank you very much.
Steve, you're a star. Thank you. And Steve, wow, feeling very strongly that we've kind of jumped the gun. I wonder, I am very much for us having good, close relations in military terms, in intelligence terms, and in trade terms with the United States of America. But that doesn't mean we have to follow America every single time they do something. I wonder whether this might have been one of those times when the Prime Minister might have said to the President, should we just wait a little bit? Should we just give this a couple of days? Just think this through a little bit more. I don't think if she'd done that, that would have damaged our relationship with America one little bit. Oh, people say, of course it would. But remember, 1966, Harold Wilson in Downing Street, Lyndon Johnson comes to visit him and says, look, we've got the special relationship. You're our closest ally. You must send troops to get involved in the war in Vietnam. And Wilson said, you know what? We're not going to do that. And within 15 years, we had the Thatcher-Reagan relationship when arguably America and Britain were closer than they'd been at any single point since the American Revolutionary Wars and their own independence. So just sometimes in a relationship saying, nope, we're not going to do that, doesn't do it terminal damage. Actually, it might just make the other side think, I wonder whether they've got a point. I wonder whether Mrs. May did try to reason with Donald Trump, did try to say, have we really thought this through? I don't have much confidence that she did. Perhaps I'm wrong. Talib says on Facebook, the USA and the UK rushed the bombs down on the Syrians' heads just a day before. This is a really important point Talib is making here. Just a day before the independent inspectors were due to arrive to ascertain if there was a chemical attack in Douma and who's responsible. Talib, you're absolutely right. You know, the OPCW were due to go in there the next day, but we weren't prepared to wait. We had to crack on and do it before they arrived and destroy, perhaps, many of the places that they could have gone to inspect after they'd been and seen the site of this attack. They could then have done their best to go and look at these supposed, maybe they are, chemical weapons factories, but we didn't do that. We didn't wait. Militarily, there was absolutely no reason for these strikes to take place on Friday night. None whatsoever. Why the rush? Talib, very, very important point. James is calling from Beaconsfield. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So what do you think?
Okay, imagine you and I are neighbours and I'm a bit of a git.
Right.
And you and I have a set-to one evening. Mm-hmm. The next morning you come out and your car's been scraped all over and your tyres are slashed.
Uh-huh.
Who are you going to take the baseball bat to?
I'm going to come round to you, James, and bash you, aren't I? Is that right?
Absolutely.
Even if you're not guilty?
Well, it's more likely that I am guilty. It's just you can't prove it. And sometimes you just cannot prove things, fully. Now, we've done the airstrikes, great. If we need to do what we need to do is explain to Assad and explain to Putin, you cannot get away with this behaviour. If you do, we will take you out of power by whatever means are necessary. OK,
James, well, first things first, I wouldn't bash you, I'd try and talk reason to you. But can you imagine, James, if we decided, right, what has happened here is so bad that those attacks on Friday night are just a preliminary of a much bigger series of strikes. Actually, the time has come, and British governments have said it before, the time has come to get rid of Assad. I tell you what my fear is, James. Those distressing pictures that you see of dead and distressed children, if you remove Assad, you will see those pictures multiplied manyfold. And I think we've really, James, got to be careful here. We may not like Assad, but as Lord Wester Spithead said a moment ago, both sides are pretty bloody horrible in this civil war, and I quote. And I think, James, if we were to move on for regime change, I think we would cause more human suffering and misery than if we left alone.
There are things which are unpalatable and things which we find very hard to swallow. That I agree with. But you've got to look at the long term. We have got a decision to make. We either get really heavily involved in this and stop it dead, or become neutral like Ireland and other countries.
Okay.
But we've got to say it either comes to an end and we will do whatever, however unpalatable, nasty or whatever. Let me ask you one other question.
Quickly, James,
How much chemical weapons are currently in the UK by foreign adversaries?
I'm sorry, I wouldn't know that, would I?
No, you cannot prove a negative, you can only prove a positive. So at the moment, we don't know how much chemical weapons is in the UK. More importantly...
No, we don't know.
And this is a real important thing. We don't know how unstable those chemicals are. And secondly, and more importantly, the countries who make the weapons, if there was an earthquake, God forbid, or some natural disaster which can release the chemicals into the air.
Well, yeah, and natural disasters always happen. James, I've got to move on. I thank you. I wouldn't want to be your neighbour necessarily. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 11:18. Are we prepared for further airstrikes in Syria if this situation escalates and continues to get worse? I'm pretty sceptical in every way about the first one we've been involved in, but, having read my newspapers this morning, it would appear that everybody agrees the government did the right thing. It's just a question about whether there should have been a parliamentary debate. No. There are lots of people out there who really are worried about this, and I know there is a big principle about the use of chemical weapons, but as Lord Wester Spithead said, surely first we have to prove that it was Assad that actually used them. And by the way, while we talk about this, down near the House of Commons, right at this moment, there is a gathering of some really important people. Anna Soubry and Chuka Ramuna, and maybe Nick Clegg's down there, I don't know. But they're gathering ahead of a rally they're going to have this afternoon up in Camden, North London. And it's a variety of groups that have come together. And it includes Open Britain, the European Movement, Scientists for the EU, Healthier In, etc., etc. And they're demanding a vote, another referendum, effectively. Gina Miller, of course, will be there as well. I do notice, when I look at these groups, that some of them have been funded by the European Commission, some of them have been funded by George Soros, and I don't know about this being a people's referendum. It looks very much like an establishment, as Kate Hoey said earlier, who simply can't accept the result. I think they're going nowhere with this now. I think Jeremy Corbyn has really decided that Labour will not be pushing for a second referendum, and I think that's that. I think the ship has sailed. That's my view. But let's get back to, are we prepared to get involved in further military escalation in Syria? I'm going to ask Jess in Enfield that very question. Good morning. Nope, something gone wrong there. I tried to get Jess in Enfield. Didn't work. Let's move on then, and let's try George from Croydon. George, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. That little thing just made me forget what the question was. But I'm one who, like yourself, does not want to see any more military action. I think the astonishing thing is that what Lord West was suggesting, though he didn't say it, and what you're suggesting, and what many people believe, is that our own government is prepared to lie to us about the most serious issues imaginable in order to create a situation they want to create, which actually is risking embroiling us in a nuclear war. I mean, this is just so, talk about unbelievable. It's so astonishing to people that it takes their breath away. And I think there's a very large number of people in this country now whose minds have been really kind of changed by these kind of events in terms of what we think our government actually is.
Well, George, I mean, you just used a big word, and you said our government's lying to us. How do you think they're lying to us?
Well, I mean, for a start, I mean, there's nobody's reporting of what the white helmets are. The white helmets were formed by James Le Mesurier, an MI6 officer, and they're embedded with Al-Qaeda forces who are now our allies, even though they're the people who are supposed to have blown up New York on 9/11. The whole thing is so monstrously, fantastically twisted and ridiculous that how can we believe anything, Nigel?
Well, the white helmets, George, for those that don't know, the white helmets are there in Syria with physically white helmets who are seen to be first responders, when buildings are blowing up and things like this. But the truth of it, George, is that the white helmets do have a track record of actually doing a lot of work for the opposition forces in Syria and effectively being a mouthpiece for them. But because they're seen to be lovely and good and kind and wearing white helmets, we kind of believe what they tell us. And I think there are, George, some very, very serious questions about their role, very serious questions also about who actually funds them.
Yeah, well, it's on record. This guy Mesurier who's an MI6 officer. I mean, they're a film company who were formed to produce pretexts for us to attack the Assad government. I mean, the war is a filthy thing, but we are not the good guys here. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Well, I think our problem, George, I think our problem is we're endlessly saying there's this side and that side. Let's pick the goodies and the baddies. And I think Lord West got it right a moment ago when he said there are no goodies in this. And I personally, I do understand the argument that we do not want chemical weapons to become part of normal warfare, if there is such a thing as normal warfare. I do understand that, but I'm not sure that we've advanced that one iota with this attack. And if these attacks work, George, well, Trump did it last year, didn't he? And now here we are doing it again.
Just one more thing, though, Nigel. I mean, the idea that we're kind of heartbroken or that we have this terrific care for how these Arab peoples are treated, and killed and so on. I mean, it's just like the moral high horse doesn't sit on people who've started all these wars and killed about 1.5 million of them, at least, maybe 2 over the last 15 years.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's just dreadful, you know.
It's a lot of people. George, I'm not opposed to military action. I think there are times when you absolutely need to use military action, but I've been very opposed to the recent military interventions, which have been done very often on very, very spurious arguments, and designed that regime change, getting rid of the Arab nationalist dictators, without, it seemed to me, ever a plan as to what was to come later. No strategy. And I feel with this... I mean, do you know, 10 days ago, Trump was saying he wanted to pull all American influences out of Syria, and now here we are, 10 days later, launching missile strikes. And, George, my feeling is that without strategy in these things, you get blown around by short-term events.
Can I say the Russian role here, Nigel? Just one last thing.
Yeah.
The reason Russia are even in Syria is because they worked out, in my view, they worked out some years ago that once they started jailing these oligarchs, that they were a target of the West as well for regime change, and they've gone into Syria to prevent these crazy Al-Qaeda people overthrowing Assad, because the next place they would be sent would be into the Muslim areas of Russia to destabilize and overthrow him. That's why he's there. It's self-defense. It's not adventurous.
No, George, thank you for your call, and particularly thank you for raising this issue about the white helmets. And I've been deeply suspicious of what their role has been there for some considerable time, and I want to know who funds them. I wonder whether it's the same kind of people who are funding the protests looking for a second referendum today. I think it probably is. Now, Jess from Enfield, we tried once, we're going to try again. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, gotcha. Right, the floor is yours.
Sorry about that.
That's right.
Okay, so just a few things I want to say. I'm actually married to a Syrian woman, a Christian Syrian.
Yep.
All my family-in-law are Syrian. I've been to Syria a few times. I was actually there in the New Year. When I was there for the New Year, it was dangerous times in Damascus. They was being attacked daily with mortar shells and rockets from the terrorists in eastern Goa.
Yep.
And they've just started to win. A lot of the area's been taken back by reconciliation rather than military action, which is good.
Yes.
Now everyone there is terrified. They're absolutely terrified, not of their government, of our government and America's government.
Have you spoken, Jess? Have you spoken to your Syrian family since the attacks?
I have, yeah, I have. I was speaking to my mother-in-law just this morning.
Right.
Like I say, everyone there is very scared. Things are very uncertain right now.
And what do they think? What do they think America, Britain and France were trying to do?
Well, they obviously... I call them terrorists because I don't think they're rebels. But they think we've supported this group of people from the start, and this is us trying to change the balance, to tip the balance. They don't know why. They don't understand why our government is supporting these kind of people that want to kill all of the Christians and the Alawites and the Shias and all of the other minority groups there. Why they're supporting them over a government army comprised mainly of conscripted soldiers. They're the sons and daughters of Syria. They're not foreign-backed terrorists.
No, Jess, you make a very powerful point. I've wondered about this. You know, however awful Assad may be as a person, who knows? But actually, under many years of his regime, you've had cafes in Damascus where Jews, Muslims and Christians could all drink coffee together in the same bar. Whereas, as you say, the opposition forces were basically, for many Christians, and you will know this better than I do, they're literally being wiped out. Tell me something, Jess, just very quickly, because I'm very interested in this. I mean, do your Syrian family believe that Assad carried out that chemical attack?
They don't, no. I'll make it clear, a lot of people there don't support Assad any more than we support our government.
Sure.
They don't believe that they would do this. You've got to bear in mind, a lot of the soldiers in the Syrian army, when this happened a few years ago and the areas got separated, a lot of these guys were split up from their families because they was in places like Aleppo and Homs fighting. So as they're taking back these areas, a lot of them are being reunited with their sisters and their mothers and people like that. Why would they drop chemical weapons on their people that are their own families, their neighbours?
So if Assad didn't do it, Jess, who did?
For me personally, and for a lot of people in Damascus right now, they feel like this whole thing was staged. Why? Who knows? I think a chemical attack did take place, but it certainly wasn't the Syrian government.
And who would have staged that, Jess?
I believe it would have been the terror groups that are involved on the ground there. And they don't care about the people. A lot of these guys aren't even Syrian. They've come from other countries, Chechnya, Afghanistan, these places. Can I just say one thing as well, Nigel? I know you're short of time.
Very briefly, Jess. Yeah, it's a fascinating phone call. But one last point, please.
From my personal point of view, I'm somebody who's quite on the left. I want to know, where is the left on this? Where's the million people that marched against the war in Iraq? Where are you all? Mobilise, come out.
Well, I think they're out there, Jess, and they're looking for leadership. And from Jeremy Corbyn this morning, they've got precious little of that, because he is getting involved, frankly, in detail. He's getting involved in legality and procedure. He hasn't outright condemned what's going on. Jess, phone call of the morning. Thank you very much indeed. Late to the news, I apologise. It's 11:32. So should we intervene more in the Syrian situation if things deteriorate, or do we need to be? Now, I'm personally very cautious about what we've done already, and I'm fascinated as this debate is going on, and particularly with the contribution that we had from Lord Admiral West, that there are an increasing number of you beginning to say, did Assad really do this, given that he's on the verge of winning this war? Now, I told you, very important people were meeting down in Westminster, and this is the big campaign, the People's Vote, they're calling it, but really, let's be honest, they just want to rerun the referendum because they don't like the result. So let's go to LBC reporter Matthew Thompson. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm fine. So tell us where you are and what's going on.
Well, as I'm here at the launch of a new cross-party campaign for a People's Vote. It's happening in Smith Square now. We've just been moved around the corner from College Green, just a stone's throw from Westminster. And it's attended by about 24, I would have thought, students from a couple of student groups. One called Our Future, Our Choice, and one called For Our Future's Sake. And they're both student-led groups which essentially are seeking a democratic way of overturning the Brexit vote. And I spoke to a couple of them a few moments ago and got their thoughts on why they're here.
Basically, I've come along because I think that the Brexit deal is going to really screw over a lot of young people throughout the United Kingdom. I'm personally from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland voted Remain, and we're not being listened to at all in the negotiations. I don't feel like any of what's been discussed in Parliament will actually affect my family and my sister's kids. I'm especially worried about them growing up in a world post-Brexit. So I think that we should get a vote on that final deal to basically have our voices heard.
The Prime Minister has promised that there will be a meaningful vote in Parliament on the final deal. Is that not enough?
I don't think so, because I basically don't trust Parliament to make decisions on this, because the Labour Party has not come out with any kind of strong line on Remain or Leave or what they think on Brexit, and I say that as a Labour Party member. I don't think that there is any political party specifically that is giving us the voice of the young people, so that's why we're here. We're actually here to influence that and make sure that whenever that does happen, our voices are heard.
In your own words, tell me why you're here.
We're here because we have a situation where most MPs think that this deal is going to hurt the country. We have a situation where most people who voted for Brexit believe that this deal leaves us a less sovereign country. We have a situation where the other half of the country never wanted this anyway. And so if nobody's going to be happy with the outcome, why shouldn't the people get a say? Why shouldn't the people be able to say, we wanted more sovereignty, we wanted a better NHS, what you're going to provide is the exact opposite, and we, the people, demand a people's vote on the final deal.
A people's vote on the final deal, of which the outcome is what? What is the choice? What are you asking people to vote on? In or out? Or
the
yes or no?
The choice has to be where they actually get to look at the deal line by line. That's the difference. It's a hell of a lot more democratic if the people actually get to see what they're signing on to, rather than a vote in the dark, which is what happened
Okay,
before.
but if they don't like the deal, what then?
Well, if they don't like the deal, the only answer that any responsible parliament can put before the people is to remain in the European Union.
And there you heard, really, Nigel, the crux of the argument here. I mean, critics...
I'm struggling with that. Surely, if we don't like the deal, we just leave anywhere. I mean, you could argue that all round the houses, Matthew, couldn't you?
Well, precisely, and I think critics of this people's vote notion, in which I don't think it's too much to assume you might be one, Nigel, would note that it's a sort of interesting use of the language of Brexit, this people's vote, to effectively, when I speak to these people, subvert the referendum. That's what these people want to do. Now, the politicians who are fronting this campaign. That's the likes of Anna Soubry and Chuka Umunna. They're much tetchier when it comes to that. They aren't talking about rerunning the Brexit referendum, but they haven't really answered the big question, which is then what are we asking? Are we asking in or out? Are we asking go back and negotiate a better deal, which seems unlikely, or is it as simple, to borrow a phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal, and we crash out? And that is the essential question, which I don't think is quite yet answered, and I will endeavour to find that out as I spend the rest of the day following these guys around, and hopefully speak to Chuka Umunna or Anna Soubry or one of the other leaders of this campaign.
Please do tell them, Matthew, that the referendum was the referendum. It wasn't supposed to be the best of three. Because what happened? I mean, this could be an endless process otherwise, couldn't it?
Well, yes, it could and it couldn't. But then you do also have to listen to some of the concerns that were raised there. I did speak to one gentleman who's attending this event today who himself voted leave, and he says, well, look, I voted leave based on certain assumptions, whether that be £350 million for the NHS or whether that be this, that or the other, and he doesn't feel that the current deal and the current shape of the deal, what he called a mess, is representing what he initially voted for. And that's partly the problem of a binary referendum on an in-out vote without actually an in-out choice without actually specifying what it would look like. Yeah. But there are concerns, and I think people do feel that they would like a say on the terms of the deal. But the question that does have to be answered, as I say again, is what does this vote look like? Is this referendum 2.0, which they don't seem prepared to concede, or is this simply another way of telling Theresa May to go back and renegotiate whatever deal she comes back with from Brussels? Yeah. Well, Matthew, you're going to have a fascinating day. Thank you very much indeed. And I just, I don't think it's going anywhere. Look, I'm not happy with the deal the government's negotiating. I'd have done it very differently. But you know what? We didn't vote for the deal. We didn't vote for economic predictions of success or failure. We voted to leave. That was the question on the ballot paper. We voted to leave the EU and, to coin a phrase, take back control. Hey, right, now back to what do we do? Are we prepared to accept further military action, or have we perhaps gone too far already? Going to ask Sally Ann, who's calling from Clapham, that question. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you.
Yes, look, I totally disagree with more military action. I mean, haven't we done enough damage to that area over there? I think, the most constructive thing they could do is reconstruct the UN, which is useless. I mean, and if you look at the people who are on the non-permanent side of it, plus, these 5 permanent members on the Security Council, I mean, we're never going to get anywhere. They sort of control the whole world, really. They're always vetoing things when they shouldn't be. I mean, I travelled all through Syria. It was the most beautiful, well-educated, beautiful place, lots of history. And funny thing is, a friend of mine over here, he actually studied with, he's an ophthalmologist, he actually studied with Assad, I mean, the guy, I don't know what on earth happened, how he made this transition from being an eye surgeon, to being, I mean, I know he's not a good guy, but I think that, they definitely want regime change, which they were working on. It was only when the Russians got involved, and yes, the Russians aren't good, but it was only then that we started getting rid of ISIS.
I mean, we were very, very clear, Sally Ann, weren't we? I mean, Cameron's government was very, very clear that they wanted regime change. That is why they wanted to give money and weapons to the rebels.
You have to create a monster, don't you? And I don't believe for a moment that he went and gassed those people.
Don't you? Now, Sally Ann,
not.
people would say you're a conspiracy theorist. So
I'm not a conspiracy. I have friends, in the Middle East. I've travelled all through it. I've worked out there, and I just think what is happening is disgraceful. And the fact that the US, the UK, and France, who happen to be people who have big oil companies too. Just look at Iraq, how that's been divvied up. It's still a mess, but the oil's still pumping out of there. And let's not forget about the gas lines, There were 2 different people vying for gas lines, which does affect Syria. So no, I'm not a conspiracist, I'm a realist. And it just really bugs me that people think we're going to solve things by killing and bombing more people. I mean, I don't agree with everything Jeremy Corbyn says, but thank God we've got someone like him. And look at, Tony Benn. Back in, when was it? I think it was back in 2015. He stood up in Parliament, which was almost empty. Imagine if it had been, to do with politicians getting raises. They would have been in there. The Parliament was nearly empty, and Tony Benn stood up there talking about the damage we would do supplying the Middle East with weapons. And look what's happened.
Well, he took a very consistent, very pacifist line on these things. Sally Ann, I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist like Tony Benn, or probably Jeremy Corbyn in reality. I think there are times to use military force, but I'm not sure now is one of them. I thank you very much indeed for your call, and Sally Ann pointing out what a lovely country Syria was. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 11:45. Should we take part in further military strikes if there is another use of chemical weapons? Or, and this is very interesting, from the moment we had Lord Wester Spithead on, to other callers and people who've spoken to relations in Damascus this morning, there is an opinion coming through this show of increasing scepticism about the fact that Assad was guilty of this. And even Boris Johnson, when he says why we launched this action, is really not terribly certain that Assad did do this. Far less certain than he is about what happened in Salisbury. I'm going to ask Carmi, who's calling from Norwich. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to say that I'm probably one of the few people who agree with what happened.
Okay.
I do not think for a minute that the reason was Assad. You have to remember they did not target Assad. They targeted a few locations where no people were supposed to be.
Yes.
The main reason was the Russians. The Russians have acted with impunity for many years, and they got emboldened to do more and more things. They saw that there is no reaction when they invaded Georgia, the Crimea. They used plutonium in London. They downed the plane.
Polonium,
sorry.
Not plutonium. Gosh, that would have been... We'd have known about it, Carmi, if it was plutonium,
yes,
wouldn't we?
I do apologise for that. And they used a chemical weapon to try and assassinate another person. And continuously, there was absolutely no repercussion. And now they got so emboldened that they have even threatened to directly attack American vessels, which was obviously just...
This was the Trump saying the missiles are coming, they're smart, new and shiny, and this was them saying we'll shoot the missiles down, and maybe even the source of the missiles, which of course would be the US Navy, which is there in the Eastern Mediterranean.
And that just shows how confident they were that there will be no repercussion. And that was the problem. We had to show them that enough is enough. So it doesn't matter whether it was Assad who fired the chemical weapon or not. The fact is the Russians vetoed any independent inspection of the area. We cannot support any Russian-led inspection of anything after the doping scandal.
No, but so you see this then? You see this as we're using humanitarian reasons as cover, effectively, for saying to the Russians, so far and no further?
Yes.
Okay. No, you put the point very clearly, but it's quite dangerous taking on Russia, isn't it, in some ways?
Well, we're not. People scared of Third World War, they have to remember the Russians are not interested in direct military conflict with NATO and America, just as much as we are not.
No, I think they don't want it. Of course they don't want it, but we don't want it either. Carmi, can I just put this point to you? Whatever we think of Putin, whatever we think of Russia, whatever we think of some of the ludicrous things that one or two of their ambassadors say around the world, they are busy fighting ISIS, who are our enemy as well.
Yes, they are. But that doesn't matter. The Russians have continuously vetoed any attempt of anyone trying to stop any
through the United Nations. Yeah. No, no.
We could not let this continue. They just had a blank check to do whatever they like.
Okay, Carmi, you've made the point very, very well. Thank you very much indeed. On Twitter, I used to listen to Nigel Farage and agree often with what he said. These days, he sounds even crazier than Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you for that on Twitter. Look, it's not me putting out wild conspiracy theories. We're getting it from people with links to Syria. We're getting it from senior military figures. All I did was to ask a question. Some people are coming on and answering it, all right? And I'm worried now. I'm worried. We're locked and loaded, says the Trump administration. We're ready to fire more missiles, says the UK government. We know that Assad, with Russian help, is winning this war, winning this civil war in Syria, winning it big time, winning it quite quickly. And we know that the opposition groups have chemical weapons and have used them before. What is to stop them next time putting on an attack and saying it's Assad that did it and income yet more missiles? If we were to really attack that regime in a heavy way and topple Assad, I think we'd make the world a lot worse. Andrew is calling from Docklands. Good morning to you.
Yes, good morning, Nigel. I think there's a thing that's I'm just struggling with. It's just there's a lot of people, there's a lot of politicians have been saying we're doing good in the Middle East, and you've heard it, several people have said that this morning, and I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what that mindset is, looking at all the destruction and the death that they've caused out there, and they still say, and you still speak to people, well, we've done good. And I came across just a very short little quote here from the philosopher Ayn Rand, and I just think it sums up exactly this mentality, and it's only going to take a second.
Go on.
He said, if a man believes that the good is intrinsic in certain actions, he will not hesitate to force others to perform them. If he believes that the human benefit or injury caused by such actions are of no significance, he will regard a sea of blood as no significance. If he believes that the beneficiaries of such actions are irrelevant, he will regard the wholesale slaughter his moral duty in the higher good. And it's the intrinsic theory of values, that's the mindset that our political class have, that produces a Robespierre, a Lenin, a Stalin, or a Hitler. And it's not an accident that Eichmann was a Kantian. And you know what Immanuel Kant was. And this is the philosophy that is underlying what is going on today.
Andrew, you can have a philosophy and you can follow it. You can have a belief system and you can follow it. But doesn't there come a point when you say to yourself, we keep trying this, we keep getting this wrong? Doesn't there come a point when they admit to themselves, actually, continued military intervention has not been a success?
Well, they don't. They think it's like what they're trying to do is just destroy everything that was there and then rebuild it the way they want it to be, which is just the most horrific thing I can possibly think of. You just change things slowly, and you show people through free trade and through genuine friendship, like the American founding fathers said, genuine friendship and entangling alliances with none. And you bring people on board, and where guns, cross borders, you've got to stop that. You've got to have free trade crossing borders. That's what stops it, and it just takes a little while, and they're impatient just for their own ideology. And
Andrew, we've launched 120 of these missiles. The French a few, the Brits a few, the majority, the Americans. Are you convinced that we waited long enough to absolutely have the proof that it was Assad that conducted this chemical weapons attack?
No, and in fact it just points to the opposite. They acted very quickly because they knew that there was going to be proof there that would perhaps disprove that he had used.
Because because inspectors were due in the next day.
Yeah, you've destroyed evidence. You do that, and you do that pre-trial or something.
Andrew, you're another conspiracy theorist.
Oh, dear me. Well, there's a lot of people dying because of these conspiracies. So and I don't think it's us that's conspiring.
Thank you, Andrew. Point very strongly made. There we are. There's another one. You see, I really hope a lot of the leader writers on our papers, all of whom today seem to say that either May's done absolutely the right thing or it would have been OK provided we'd had a bit of parliamentary scrutiny, are listening to the calls and the messages we're getting here in LBC this morning. There is an absolutely massive gulf between what the London mainstream media and political class think about Syria and the way ordinary folks think about our intervention here. John is calling from Glasgow. Hello, John.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. So, come on, tell me, did she do the right thing or the wrong thing?
Yes, I definitely did. I do think she's done the right thing.
Okay.
She's the Prime Minister of the UK, and she has every right to do this. They broke the law. They broke international law by using the chemicals. Now, you may say that, well, why would he do this if he's winning the war? Mm-hmm. Exactly for that reason he would do it, to make an excuse, to say that, I never done it, why would I do it? We're winning the war, so why would I do it? So,
Hang on, John. If he's winning the war, what benefit is it to him to kill 75 people?
Because as I just said, he can then switch the blame to us by saying it wasn't him. Why would I do this? This is Assad saying, why would I do this when I'm winning the war? So basically, it's a double bluff, if you like. But at the end of the day,
John, hasn't he got more important things to do, like beating ISIS?
Well, yes, we have. But hasn't Assad got more important things to do than killing thousands of people?
Well, John, he is fighting. There has been a brutal civil war with huge casualties over about the last 7 years.
I understand that.
But all right, okay, let's, for the purposes of this, okay, Assad did it. Let's say he did it. Do you think our missile strikes will be more effective this year than the American ones were last year?
I do, because he's got the support of probably the few of us at the moment, but I think he will get the support, and it's been spoken by the UN that they agreed it was Assad that done it.
Okay.
And again, Nigel, I'm just on about why May had done it, and to me, it's shown courage rather than weakness, as the limp Labour Labour leader said, that it showed weakness by doing this. I think that she showed courage to do it, and I just hope she would pass that courage on to a stance in other things that were going on about now, Europe and everything else, because it seems to me that she has. I think she's done very well as a Prime Minister since, because she was in a position where there was no plan B to do anything else for this country.
No.
I think she's done well as a Prime Minister.
No, she inherited that. Well, John, I tell you what, if she shows real strength in the Brexit negotiations, I'll be cheering her too. Well, thanks, everybody. Fascinating. Big gap between thinking in London and thinking in the country. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow night at 7, 3 this afternoon. It's Andrew Castle. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.